Well, well, well. Just like that, out of nowhere, WrestleMania weekend is in the books. 2 nights of WrestleMania are behind us. It's supposed to be the biggest night of the year. Supposed to be the biggest match of the year in the main event. And after a few years of some really hot main events, after a few years of a ton of focus on the execution. You might even argue that many of these main events have been overbooked in the era since Triple H has taken over. You cannot allege that tonight. Tonight's main event had a finish as far as results go that was not shocking, that I think many people would have predicted and are probably satisfied with the outcome if that was their prediction. Be that as it may, that main event that we just saw between Cody and John Cena left a ton to be desired. The in ring work was one thing, the presentation was another. But the entire melodrama of everything we had leading into this, or the lack thereof, and the non payoff of the lack thereof of buildup was really on display over here. And a build to a match that wasn't very good in the first place ended up with a really bad payoff in the end. So we're going to break everything down with this main event and this card. This card had a resemblance to WrestleMania cards of the prior 10 WrestleManias. You might look at WrestleManias 33, 34, and 35. Those were shows that started out with really hot starts to those shows. Those shows started out like they were on track to be maybe the greatest of WrestleManias ever. And by the time those shows were done, no one was really thinking that about those shows. In fact, people were thinking about how those shows grinded to a halt. Well, that's what we kind of had here tonight. We had a show in a night that had a really hot start and had what should have been an angle at the end that everyone is going home and talking about. But instead, we kind of sputtered out at the end of this show. We were on track to have one of the greatest nights in WrestleMania history, and it turned into an average night of WrestleMania, which ultimately, if we're being honest, ends an average WrestleMania weekend. We're going to break it all down tonight. Going to take it match by match. We have a women's champion that's still the women's champion. We have a new intercontinental champion. We have new women's tag champions. Randy Orton had his open challenge answered. And of course, we have a new WWE undisputed champ. You know, it would seem that going into this main event that we had tonight, one of the biggest problems was going to be the weird dissonance that the crowd was going to have to be in. Despite, I think, a lot of the wrestling community predicting that the wrestling fans were going to turn on Cody at multiple times within the last 3 years, it never really happened. You would hear the buzz about it online. It happened back in the day in AEW, but really hadn't happened in front of WWE crowds. That was until this program with John Cena, which, let's be honest, has been a bit of an odd program and has been a bit uneven. And it all came to a head Friday night when Cody was explicitly booed in that segment on SmackDown. Now, that segment on SmackDown was no different than all the other one-on-one segments that Cody and Cena had leading into WrestleMania. The drastic difference was in the crowd reaction. And we had reports. We had our own Zach Haydorn out there. And others on Twitter noting about the reaction that Cody would get whenever he'd be shown or whenever he was referenced to the live crowd. They were not that into him. And as the match played out, though, tonight, I wouldn't say it was a wholesale rejection of Cody, although you might have said that Cena was the one that was more in favor in the match. And by the time you got the result, I don't know what we had. We had what you can call most assuredly is a flat finish. For the second night in a row, you had heels walking out with their heads held high. I guess that's going to happen on occasion. And last night, you could say it's a little bit different because at least the angle itself was hot. There was nothing hot about what happened tonight. What happened tonight was a less interesting version of what happened at Elimination Chamber. This was not some big angle or some big progression, other than, of course, the title changing hands. And I know me and others have said it before that sometimes it doesn't matter how you get there, you just have to get there. And I'm not ready to give up on this Cena heel turn just yet. If we're going to get a few more months out of it, especially with him as the champion, especially if we're going to get matches with him against Orton coming up, with him against Punk, maybe a return match with Cody. That's all very enticing, and all of that is obviously still on the table, regardless of what happened tonight. In fact, it's very much more on the table, being that the wheels that were put in motion tonight. With that said, if you want an angle to be off to a hot start, to have something to be really, really memorable, you weren't going to get that tonight because WWE did not offer memorable. Tonight, WWE, the best they could offer you was just a little more than they had been offering you. And this had been the case for months, since Survivor Series, since Saturday night's main event, since the Royal Rumble, maybe even since the Chamber. There's been all this talk about the conservative booking of Triple H. And then the Chamber, they pulled a major trigger, right? The Cena heel turn, one of the biggest cards you have to play. They do nothing on the build, by the way. No, they don't do anything to that. They just sort of throw that out there. It does save the main event because the main event was going to die at death of these two baby faces. So at least you have the heel turn to proceed and go forward and add a little bit of interest and intrigue to this match and to this program and to this card, which quite frankly lacked intrigue and interest the whole time leading up into it. And the heel turn was amazing. What's up, Hong Kong? Hopefully we're not too sad for you. Um, but there was no payoff. There was no big payoff. It was just regular booking. You know what this reminded me of? And I'm sure like maybe everyone was proved wrong in hindsight then, but you know what this is akin to? A little bit like WrestleMania 39 when you walked out of there and it wasn't so much the result of what had happened. It was the way they got to it. Remember the big Solo Sikoa interference? And that wasn't anything special. And this wasn't anything special. Having Travis Scott be the big swerve at the end of this show is not really selling you anything. You're not delivering upon anything. There's nothing to get you excited. There's no buzz. And that's not all wrestling needs to be. Wrestling doesn't need to just be these buzz getting headline moments. But you kind of build a buzzword, a show that's supposed to be about this buzz, and you deliver nothing on the road to this show where you have to have something on this show you think to pull out. And instead, what you had was just another piece of the chapter and wherever this is going, a significant piece, a historical piece, according to WWE's framing, but nothing special, nothing memorable. And quite frankly, a waste of a lot of assets in hindsight. So we'll talk about all of that in a while. We'll actually revisit the main event. Let's lighten things up and, in fact, start from the top. And I just kind of came on here and ranted about that main event. I didn't even introduce myself. How rude of me. I am Rob. This is the Nocturnal Knockout, a Brass Ring Media podcast right here on the One True Sport YouTube channel and always on RVD Twitter. What's up, everyone? Happy WrestleMania night. Happy WrestleMania weekend. I'm sorry I sound so cranky. It's just kind of how I sound because the hopes were high. The big fight Phil was amazing. Then the bell rang, and you waited and waited and waited and waited and waited and waited for something more. And when the Nevada logo went up and you got Lee Fitting and Paul Levesque, it was all over and nothing important had happened. But hopefully you hang with us for the rest of the night. Hopefully that can be important. And if you want to keep the conversation going, as even Hong Kong Huey has already done, you absolutely can. Go ahead and type into that chat. Get in on the conversation. Let's talk WrestleMania night 2. You want to talk anything night 1? Let's talk about the future. There's a tons of consequences to tonight, just like last night. It might not be the most blow-away night of WrestleMania that you've ever seen, but the consequences are there. What happened was real, and it will alter the landscape of WWE, at least in the near term. All right. Let's break it down from the top. And last night we had the freshly minted Hall of Famer Paul Levesque, Triple H, welcoming us to the show. Tonight we got his better half and Stephanie welcoming us to WrestleMania, noting that she was 16 last time WWE was in Vegas. Macho Man was also taking note of that as well. Our first match of the night, though, as was announced earlier, I believe, on social media, are the pre-show. I don't know. The pre-show starts like 5 hours before the show. So I don't know what the difference is between the pre-show and social media at that point. All I know that it was announced that the triple threat between Io Sky, Bianca Belair, and Rhea Ripley would be opening the show. Just like we had the night before with a major title match opening the show. There was no intrigue on either night what was going to close the show. So you have a bit of a bookend with the other major singles titles matches that were represented of the evening. Obviously, there was a women's title match last night as well. But here we are, the triple threat of the women's division. And you can talk about bad builds on this show. You can talk about multi-person builds on this show. And the nexus of bad multi-person builds was this match. These ladies had a ton of pressure on them because this build had been so bad that they didn't even really mention much of this program in the last week of WWE programming, which is something you probably shouldn't do for one of your major title matches, but it's what they had to do, especially one that was only booked technically about a week and a half ago. And something that was odd here, much like the women's title match last night, the champ comes out first. And then Bianca came out second. Now, Bianca was never actually turned heel, but she's been the one taking the heel heat in all this. Even though Rhea has been the one that has acted and portrayed herself as a heel, she has not been booed in the entirety of this build. If anything, she's been encouraged by the people to keep up her negative behavior. So why would she ever change her ways? And they did try to give some explanation on commentary as to why she was being booed, but it was actually kind of hard to follow. I will say though, because you had the entrances with the pretty standard entrance for Io Sky. You had the dancers and the young women with Bianca. And then you had a fairly standard entrance with Rhea Ripley, except for she was wearing this cool little crown thing. And I got to say, that crown was much cooler than any of the crowns or headdresses or anything like that Triple H ever tried to wear in his overindulgent entrances. This trumped all of that. And considering some of the other headgear we saw this weekend and some of the other like accoutrements that you saw the wrestlers coming to the ring with here at this most sponsored of WrestleManias, I gotta say, this little crown and halo thing, it was one of the better things we saw in the evening. And as I said earlier, much better than anything Triple H has ever worn on his head. This stupid little Conan thing in 2006. Take it easy, King of King. The match started with a variation of the spot that they've worked into like every segment that's involved these three ladies, where it's all about Bianca and Rhea, but then Io is either shoved off to the side or has to get her stuff in. Um, Io gets bounced just kind of out of the ring to get this thing started off of, and this match just starts out with everyone kind of kicking each other and knocking each other out of the ring. But immediately on this match, there is a rapid pace to it. I talked about last night that triple threat being pretty good in the main event, but one of the things that I think it suffered from is it had that syndrome where it would just sort of devolve into these little mini one-on-one matches until you came to a finish, and then someone had to help the other person kick out. And that seemed like an expanded format that they were going with for much of the match. There were moments of that in this match, but there were much more moments with all three women interacting, and this really feeling like a crazy triple threat with obviously three people involved. And as I mentioned, it came down to Rhea and Bianca quickly, but then Io quickly rejoins. And Io hit one of the first big moves of the match was actually her flip outside of the ring on Rhea. And at this point, I think we started to establish a bit of a story in this match that Rhea and Bianca were going to be so into each other and so into pinning each other, they just were not going to regard Io Sky, who was going to be flying around, putting in like maximum effort in all of this. At one point, Bianca shortly thereafter lands a bunch of suplexes on Io and is completely booed the entirety that she's landing these suplexes. She's landing a lot of them and she's getting booed, and the boos are building. Shortly thereafter, Io actually takes a razor's edge from Rhea, and she gets razor's edged, however you want to say that, right into Bianca, like knocks Bianca back and hits Bianca. It's pretty amazing the way this plays out, and every one of them ends up just devastated from a whole series of moves. And once again, Io Sky makes it to her feet. You have the move where Io goes for the moonsault. Rhea's there to stop her, so she trips her up on the rope, and then Bianca runs in for that spot that I'm kind of sick of this weekend between the NXT show and what we saw last night, where like the one person is suplexing the other person, holding them on the ropes, and the other people are doing the superplex, and all it just looks like everyone's doing one slam, but it's supposed to be this big, epic thing, and that's all it turned out to. Io does have a fire up moment though shortly after that, and the crowd loves it. But Bianca breaks it up with a pretty intense spear. Bianca then hits a really amazing 450. There were a lot of revolutions of spins on this show this weekend. Between the two nights, there was a lot of flippy stuff happening, a lot of actual revolutions going on here. She hit a 450, I guess you would call it, but Rhea broke it up. Bianca then kicked out of a riptide. Io reversed a riptide, but ate a big old boot. Io once again reversed a top rope riptide and tried to go for the moonsault, and actually went for the moonsault, got the moonsault, but Rhea snuck her knees up, and that was that. Bianca ends up getting Io into a KOD, but Rhea breaks up the pin. And at this point, you're all in on this match. It is high energy, high intensity. It seems a little easy early maybe for the finishing sequences, but it's okay because they're keeping your attention with everything that they're doing here. After that little section, though, Io kind of rolled out and disappeared a little bit because they were going to give some time for a minute, it seemed like, to Bianca and Rhea. They're slapping each other. In fact, Bianca is slapping Rhea on the ground. Eventually, Rhea gets up and gets the advantage. They're fighting at the top rope, and Bianca falls to the floor. Io then is back up there on the top rope with Rhea and tries to hit a poison Rana, but it's actually reversed it to the turnbuckle. And this move looked amazing. The way that Rhea was able to sort of do the sit up on her, and Io just hits the turnbuckle flat on and knocks out her head, which looked like that might be it for her in the match, but that wasn't the case. But you knew you were getting close because you had the braid shot. Bianca hits the braid shot to Rhea into a KOD, and then Io just shoots out of nowhere with another moonsault. You couldn't see it on camera. You saw it more on the replay. It was straight off the top rope. But as you're watching this all play out, the way the camera angle worked, they just shot out. Io just shot out with a big flip. Goes for the pin on Bianca. 1, 2, 3. Gets the pin. Just like that. The afterthought of this WrestleMania build, Io Sky retains her title at WrestleMania against two of the toughest women in the division. That was a very, 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 very good no lag triple threat match. Immediately, this match put everything the night before on notice. This was probably better than any match we got the night before. Just to kick this stuff off, just to kick the night off. It was high energy. It was not botchy at all, despite it being so high flying and so many of these big moves. It did not overstay its welcome. It wasn't there too long. It was a mess getting to this match, but the payoff was amazing. And the booking decision is interesting. I think a lot of people had Io winning, but to know that they were actually going to go there against these two opponents, I think there definitely had to be some doubt, as obviously there's stuff to do with each character. Rhea's in a bit of a state of flux where, the fans are always, I think, going to keep her relatively babyface until they really do something for her to turn on them. But they just have an affection for her going all the way back to the Dom storyline. But her character been kind of a mess ever since she'd been separated from the Liv storyline. Once they closed that out, her character had been a mess as champion, interacting with Bianca and Io. I don't think they have to do a ton to fix her, but I do think she made it to get away from the women's division for just a little bit. She may have to have some feuds on the men's side, or she just may have to sort of be around. Obviously, she has what the young people call aura, and she's got that in spades. So I think she will ultimately be fine. Be a little bit of a different scenario. Bianca's in a position where she was not supposed to necessarily, I don't think, get booed in any part of the process of the buildup of this match, but being that you had no heels, she ended up being in that position. And I think she could be a very, very effective heel, but it's going to be hard to do because you have her also involved with the Naomi and Jade storyline and the edges of that. So can you keep her full heel? Can she sustain that? It certainly is needed. You need a serious heel on the roster, regardless of what show it's on the women's side of things. So it's not the worst thing to have Bianca in that position. But ultimately, she will be fine as well, because I think both Bianca and Rhea are okay. What they need is a one-on-one match with each other at a WrestleMania. This does not count as that. This does not serve as that. But it's good to see that Io wasn't just the transitional champion that many thought she would be. And her reign has been odd. She got her title on a Monday after a pay-per-view, and she was explicitly booked as the afterthought in this feud. I'm not under any delusions, though, that she will keep this belt for very, very long. As we saw in the show tonight, the women's division has a lot of boost to it, and there can be a lot of sharks in that water. But for one night to sort of solve what everything was with this feud, this was amazing. And I hope my hyperbole on the match doesn't come across as someone who's tired after watching wrestling for 3 days straight. This match got you up out of your seat. This match kept you awake. This match made you think that this was going to be an epic night of wrestling. I've even heard people go as far as to call this one of the great openers of all time in WrestleMania history. And it certainly is on the list. I don't think it's up there necessarily with Brett and Owen. In fact, I don't think you can touch that. And I don't know that it would necessarily even touch something like Daniel Bryan and Triple H from WrestleMania 30. You also have some great ladder matches in there of some great openers. This was by far the greatest women's opener of all time. One of the great women's matches in WrestleMania history. This surpasses by far the WrestleMania 32 triple threat that the women had. Overall, good match here. This was a really good way to start off the show. Let's see what E has to say. E is always following the press conferences and post games for us. Let's see what E has to say. He says, Cena just called a reported question lazy and journalist clickbaiting. He's just roasting people on their question, calls another lazy, and says next. That's pretty awesome. I was seeing Logan Paul have his way with a reporter right before I came on here. So I'm all about that because those press conferences are kind of dumb. He said that Cena ends his post show by saying, I'm the last real champion. Watch how I ruin wrestling, and walks off. Well, you've done it in so many other eras. You've ruined wrestling, Cena. So let's see if you can do it one more time. Some guys who didn't ruin wrestling tonight were Damian Priest and Drew McIntyre. They had themselves a Sin City street fight. Now, the question with all these city branded street fights is always the same. What makes it unique? What makes it a Sin City street fight? And in the case of this match, it was nothing special. There was nothing that explicitly made this a Sin City street fight. It was just a regular street fight. With that said, it was an amazing, amazing street fight. This match did not have the momentum and the intensity that we got in the opener, but it definitely held up its end of the bargain and kept things hot and kept things moving. So Drew came out, and I had no idea what Drew was dressed in. I think McAfee was clearing it up, but I don't know. I just really don't care, to be honest with you. There was so many tie-ins on this WrestleMania that it became absolutely exhausting, and I just simply lost the stomach for it after a while. But Damian Priest had himself a bit of an entrance. He had Kerry King of Slayer, not Slayer, but just Kerry King of Slayer, which he's been touring with some solo tours. And I know, as they mentioned tonight, Slayer, despite having their big farewell tour a couple years ago, one that was pretty well received, and that lasted for about a year and a half, as things go with rock bands. I thought the Kerry King entrance, though, looked cool. Damian Priest was really excited. Sounded a little bit better than I thought the guitars for Living Color sounded last night. But Kerry King's not like, he's a riff guy, but not really like a play you out guitar hero shredding melt your face kind of guy. So I thought that part was just a little bit weird. Didn't sound like anything special. He's also reporting that some fan on the post show background holding up a La Parka mask. It would have been so cool to see La Parka's entrance and perform at Mania. Yeah, not this year. So they ended up, these two, Priest and McIntyre, they ended up getting out of the ring right away. The brawl took them out of the ring immediately, and Priest got superplexed onto the ramp. Drew was throwing steps into the ring and taking his time, and Damian threw some steps right back at him. But it was okay because as the brawling was going on and then just outside the ring, Drew was able to take himself a selfie and post it during the match. Tonight, you really had the feeling that Drew had his mojo back. The mojo that he seemingly had lost ever since he was assigned to this feud or whatever happened with LA Knight at the Rumble. The general sour face that he'd been carrying since then. Felt like that frown was just turned a little bit upside down on this show and on this match. Tables are ended up setting up on the opposite side of the ring, but nothing comes of them. So you know they're going to play into it later. And of course, as was the case many times this WrestleMania weekend, there was a big flip that Drew hit outside the ring, and he completely launched in this thing. I mean, Drew went taking off, and it was just perfect. And we keep saying this, but there's a lot of great flips on this show. A lot of really big people that are taking these flips too. A lot of big beefy bodies. We take for granted so much of the athleticism we see in modern WWE because it is so dang athletic, even though the main events tend to have this more slow plotting style to them nowadays. And back in the ring, Drew was setting up for a Claymore, but Damian just throws a chair at him, and Drew kind of punches it. I think I wasn't sure what happened here, and they went back to replay a few times, and it was a little confusing. But they kept doing the spot where, or they kept referring to the spot like, did he headbutt it away, or what did he do with it? And I think it just kind of nicked him. I think maybe Priest missed with the chair. He hasn't quite gone to the Terry Funk school of throwing chairs just yet. But then he does actually hit a for real Claymore, but Damian Priest kicks out of it. And then he almost hits a Claymore with the chair around his neck, like Pillman style. Drew almost hits another Claymore then. But then that's when Priest kind of reversed with this standing choke slam. And he sets up a chair, does Priest. Sets it up in the middle turnbuckle. So again, you have all these things set up, and you know that they're going to come into play at some point, but you just don't know when. Drew goes on to set up a table. And Priest puts Drew through that table with a razor's edge. So 2 matches in a row, we get a razor's edge. Should be a pretty sacred, protected move. It always looks cool when it happens, so it's always going to get a big pop. So maybe we shouldn't see it 2 matches in a row. But we got a razor's edge through the table, which only yielded a 2 count. Drew then hit a future shock on to the steps, which itself only got a 2 count. They trade blows and make the crowd happy. They're doing their whole, strong style thing. And Priest eventually lays it in there with a big old clothesline and just lays McIntyre out. But this is where the match all turned around. This was the fatal mistake. Damian Priest, he always references The Undertaker, talks about how cool it is to do all these Undertaker type things, including going old school. But as soon as he was on those ropes, he was pushed off by Drew and flew right into the mess of tables that were set up earlier. And so Chekhov's tables were eventually paid off. In the ring, Drew hits another Claymore. This time, though, he hits it into the corner turnbuckle where the chair was set up. You know the chair that Damian Priest had put out there earlier? Well, yeah, this time it came back to bite him. And from there, we get the 1, 2, 3, and a pin by Drew McIntyre. A much-needed win by Drew McIntyre. If Drew wasn't going to get the win here, his character would be at absolute rock bottom. And WWE would in a month or so want to put him in a title picture, want to put him in something main event after they had him lose here. And that would have been one of the worst decisions, easy for me to say, one of the worst decisions they could have made. So I think that was a good choice to abstain from just having him completely bottom out. I don't know why they had to cool him so hard going into WrestleMania. A lot of it was the opponent, and I don't want to just hate on Damian Priest because I don't think he's the worst. He's shown tonight, and he's shown many times in the past that there's a lot of scenarios when he can deliver. With that said, a program with him does not necessarily feel like main event or something of focus. If anything, for someone like Drew, it felt like a big demotion after the prominent position he had been on the card and all the great work he had done throughout the past year. And this WrestleMania feud seemed to further cool him off. But there was no real reason for that. I don't think there was no lack of momentum that he meaningfully had leading into all of this. He was just simply the odd man out. It's like he just did not have a main event level dance partner. He was the only guy on the main event side. It's almost like Seth took the last little bit of main event scraps and took those. And so he was stuck in something that, could have been a real train wreck or been something that we didn't care about very much or something that would be pretty short. They put quite a bit of effort into this, and this match really delivered. The build to this was nothing. But on the card, it kept the momentum going. And I think from a booking perspective, this is probably the right decision to not have the Drew character bottom out. Now, I see no reason why this time next year, Drew's not right at the top, competing for a title, or just underneath on the card. Therefore, I think you need to take some care with him in the next year. He had such a good year on the mic last year, but he ultimately ended up losing his major feud. And that's okay because the person he lost that major feud was going to go on to big things at the beginning of the year. So that makes sense. And we can see what Drew McIntyre ended up doing at this part of the year. He didn't necessarily need to be built up for anything. But I do think he needs to be rebuilt and needs to be refocused and he needs to be made special again. It's okay that he takes pins every now and then. That's not the main issue. But he's a guy kind of like Roman Reigns that can't really be a mid-carder. He's there and he's towards the top of the card, and that's it. What's up, Steve? Steve is not a fan of the main event. Says it makes Hogan Warrior look like a classic. Because it was a classic, Steve. You know, speaking of propaganda, take a little break from my Drew McIntyre analysis to just say this. I finally watched the WrestleMania 9 doc before Mania. Because like if I don't watch it this weekend, I'll never have the momentum to watch it. I'll never be in like a Vegas WrestleMania mode. And it's funny because that match, that card looks great and has a cool aesthetic feel to it. And it has a real controversial finish. But the way that documentary makes it sound like that match was, or that card was something great and had these great matches with this great variety. She like, no, there's like 1.5 good matches on that show. That show is a complete train wreck other than its aesthetics and its cool backstories. So you can put lipstick on that pig all you want, but that wasn't the case. This WrestleMania looked great. There were cool novelties to it. There were stuff that will only be unique to this WrestleMania. I wonder how they're going to retell the story of it. Hopefully they don't retell it and say that it was some epic main event when, as Steve pointed out, it absolutely was not. As far as Priest goes, I don't know if he necessarily needs a reset, but if he was a guy that once he came over from Raw to SmackDown, he hasn't really clicked. And he should have been more of a top guy on SmackDown, and feuding with Drew McIntyre should not be a demotion, but everything like that has felt that way. So like many of the partnerships on this show, as far as opponents go, it's time to move on. The build was so long to this show, for much of it starting at the Royal Rumble in January. We are now on 420. That was a really, really long time, and we only had one PLE in between. And so if I sound like a broken record where I keep saying that many of these feuds need to end, because they need to end, because they were going on for a really, really long time. They need some of the lower stakes allowed to breathe time period of post-WrestleMania season. No, I haven't seen anything about a reality show about the writers' room in WWE. That would seem to be very counterintuitive. Don't do a show about your creative process to that extent. But I mean, if there's an authenticity to it, I definitely hashtag would watch. But I have no interest in that, if that's actually what that is. I got to say, though, after these first two matches, you had to be feeling pretty good about what you had in store for WrestleMania because you were off to such a hot start. I think so, Steve. Here's the thing on that. Steve's asking a question, and we'll address this before we move on. So Steve is asking, and thanks for the question, Steve. Do you think Drew gets a push like Rollins is getting now after losing to everybody over the last year? I think Drew McIntyre's character, despite the booking and the build-up to WrestleMania, is in a much better position than Seth Rollins' character was at WrestleMania last year, in terms of how the booking had been going forward, where he could be on the card, how you could take him seriously, how soon he could realistically challenge for a championship. Heck, Seth couldn't even walk last year, and he'd been booked like crap leading into WrestleMania and even at WrestleMania. And as you mentioned, he had lost to everyone. With that said, the storyline he is connected to with the Roman Reigns Shield storyline is like the perma storyline, the overarching storyline in WWE. It is the original sin of modern WWE programming, is Seth Rollins putting that chair in Roman Reigns' back. So I think in terms of WWE's perspective, that's a much bigger storyline than anything Drew McIntyre has been involved in. With that said, I think Drew McIntyre has been booked much stronger, and I see no issue with him. And in fact, I kind of project him to be close to the top of the card next year. I do not think, though, he will be in quite as prominent position as Seth Rollins was in, because there is no storyline that you can give to Drew McIntyre that have the same kind of connectivity in the ways that they're trying to do it with Seth Rollins. From there, the pace kept going, and you knew that was going to be the case when this was the match that was implied to be next. You knew that we were still on that stream of hyper momentum as we had the fatal four-way for the Intercontinental title, with Braun Breaker defending against Penta, Finn Balor, and Dominik Mysterio. Penta was out first, Dom was out second, and he had this mask on his. I don't know if it was exactly Ray's mask or what the context of this luchador mask was, but I don't know if it was part of the gimmick or he legitimately couldn't get it off of his head. Either way, it worked for the character. It was a great visual. Him being mad and then being mad about it after was pitch perfect. That was a really, really nice touch to have on there. Finn was out next, and of course, the champion Braun with the cool little red, white, and blue singlet was out last. It was a fast start. Everyone brawling all over the place, getting out of the ring immediately. And there was a spot early on where all of a sudden, just out of nowhere, Braun flew with one of those flying spears. Like, I'm pretty sure Braun can fly. I used to think Ricochet can fly, and I still think he might be able to. But at this point, I'm almost positive that Braun could just take flight, because he seems to do so very often. And like the two matches that came before this one, this was all 100% action, all gas and no brakes. That's funny. I'm gonna put that one up in a little bit. And Dom was getting some cheers, and the commentary addressed. Now, it wasn't overwhelming. It wasn't like it was just he was the biggest star in the match, and that was that. There was plenty of cheers for Penta, and then plenty of cheers for Braun, and some acknowledgement of Finn. A little less so for him, but the commentary did address that he was getting some cheers and some of the momentum that he has. And Braun, for his part, he got a few showcases here. He got to clean house a few times, and then eventually hit a top rope Frankensteiner on Finn, which looked pretty good. And then Dom hit the drop kick on Finn, but Finn ended up intercepting the 619. And up to this point in the match, they were working together pretty well, and this was the first bit of dissension between the two. And you know that's where this was all leading to. Every week I talk about it. After the opening segment, we have to go back to the Judgment Day's lair to figure out what they're unable to do this week. And I wonder if we got a segment on the post show, because their net of titles, they seem to net the same amount of titles that they do whenever they're all going for the gold. So at least we were consistent in that respect. Penta hit Finn with a Penta driver, but Braun was back very quick to break it all up, and we got a reset there. Braun and Penta get a nice stare down and a stand-up moment, and the crowd is into it. There was a time when a lot of people thought that was going to be the match at WrestleMania, and I don't know that would have been a bad direction of Penta and Braun, but that's not where they went right now. I feel like that's still a little unresolved, and maybe a great one-on-one match on a Raw would be something that is needed. Although both of those characters look like they need some wins in the near future, so going against each other might not be the best way to do things. But Carlito helps Penta take Braun out of the ring, giving a little bit of assistance to Penta. But Dom almost gets the roll-up win on Penta as a result of this. And then Dom gets some help from Carlito. At least, he's on his team. I don't know when Carlito came out there, who he accompanied. He was just like out there all of a sudden. So if you guys know, you can tell me in the chat. I have no idea who he was out there with. I'm going to get to that in 1 second. Because Carlito has Penta on the announce table, and then boom! Once again, my thesis is that Braun Breaker can fly, and he flies and takes out Carlito. Carlito has to only be employed or contracted, I should say, to WWE at this point because of his amazing ability to sell Braun Breaker's spears. Like Carlito's so slow in the ring. There's nothing on the mic that's special. He's a joke in the promos. He is there in that company to just take these beautiful spears from Braun Breaker. Like at every level, he should be like the Bobby Heenan to Braun Breaker's Hogan. Whoever he's feuding with, he should just have Carlito should always just be the manager so he can constantly take these spears from him. I swear to God, like Braun Breaker is 10% more over just being in like physical proximity to Carlito because you know one of these spears can happen at any time. Okay, so I'm not crazy. He just kind of showed up out of nowhere. Braun then also lands a spear on Penta. And then Dom lands a 6'9" on Penta or Braun. I'm a little confused in my notes. I have Dom lands a 6'9" on Dom, which I do not think was the case. Finn throws Dom off the top rope though, and hits a coup de grace on Braun, and goes for the pin. But then Dom hits the splash, kind of similar to the Io Shirai spot from, or Io Shirai, Io Sky. Excuse me. Similar to the Io Sky spot from earlier in the night with the frog splash or the splash kind of out of nowhere. And he gets the pin, new champ, and a fair pop to him. So far at this point, WrestleMania was a complete 3 out of 3 in terms of the matches delivering, having plenty of action, and just really being a high energy quality start to the show. Now, there's obviously going to be some fallout whenever you have a fatal 4-way like this. We talk first about the champion, Braun. Now, I feel, and I think it's a fairly logical summation to make that this was essentially a promotion for Braun Breaker. This is a way of getting the title off of him without him having to be pinned, without him having to have some big, long, undefeated streak, which he doesn't actually even have the way Gunther did. But you don't have to point to this one loss and it'd be like that one albatross loss. And it, oh, I lost, but now I'm going to go up and I'm going to do better things. Technically, that's the case. He did lose his title. And if he goes up to do better things, like he's falling up, but it gives him a nice little on-ramp to not have to lose before entering the main event scene. Which I'd like to know your guys' opinions in the chat. Is it time for Braun Breaker to enter the main event scene? It would seem that he's kind of chomping at the bit, and I wouldn't say he's done everything there is to do with the IC level because he hasn't even been champ that long and hasn't been around, but I think we're in need of a little bit of fresh blood at the top of the card, and it may be time to start positioning him there. Now, when he does ascend to the top, that's up for debate. Is it sooner? Is it before WrestleMania next year? Is it WrestleMania season next year? Is it post WrestleMania season? Does he have a big featured match on WrestleMania? There's a lot of different ways you can go with him. But I think remaining in the Intercontinental title scene really won't do him any favors at this point. There's matches with a lot of people, all the baby faces, but you can also have matches with heels like Gunther, Seth Rollins. Obviously, CM Punk's in the mix. There's plenty from that Raw roster that you can feed to Braun. An AJ Styles match could also still be up for grabs. Another thing that they teased going into this year's WrestleMania, but we got both guys in some different spots. In terms of Finn, I think he was here to do what he did. He was here to take the fall. He was here to progress the Dominik storyline, and he's going to be here to feud with Dominik. Finn's time, let's face it, in the company, in a spotlight position, has passed. He is a lot of people's favorites. A lot of people are really into him. There was a time I myself was really into him, and I still think he's very talented and has a lot to offer. But he has simply been positioned as a lower card wrestler and a guy who can never win these big matches and is not really in the mix. If anything, he can be upper to lower mid card, right in that middle zone. That's not always a bad spot, but his potential is probably greater than that. But that's where he is now, and I think where he's going to be right now, unfortunately for him, is putting over the new champ, Dominik Mysterio. Now, Dominik Mysterio is in a weird position. Again, a guy that himself has never been really turned face and was not really turned face on this night. And I don't know if he's got a face run in him, but the crowd was into him on this night. That's what Steve is asking is, does Dom become a babyface and win legitimately with attitude like Carlito? That is very hard for me to project how you're going to do this character going forward, Steve, for a couple of reasons. It reminds me a little bit of the conundrum you often have with The Miz. Every few years, The Miz has some really entertaining and engaging heel work. And he ends up being a really good heel who does get heel heat, but eventually there's enough respect and admiration and good lines in there that the crowd starts to take to him as a babyface. And then they inevitably turn Miz babyface and it falls flat because he's a cheesy, like undercard wrestler. That's how it comes across. I do not want to see that for Dominik. Dominik's whole juice as a character that he's had was as a heel. It was attacking his dad, hanging out with Rhea, being subservient to Liv. It's all those little dynamics of the character that made the character so amazing. Now, he kind of has the Cody thing where even no matter what he's given, he sinks his teeth into it. By he, I mean Dom, and it ends up being pretty good. But I have trouble seeing how exactly they're gonna turn him into being a complete babyface. Because is there value on him, fighting as Rey Mysterio's earnest son as an underdog? There's nothing underdog about him. He's explicitly positioned as like this nepo baby who's very sensitive, who's a little extra tall and a little extra talented, and as the definition of the born on second base and thinks he hit a double or whatever the hell the saying is. Clearly, I was born on the wrong bases. You get the idea. I don't really see. I'm not saying that they're wrong in doing it and that they won't be able to pull it off. I have a real hard time seeing that as a babyface character. We saw it recently with Tiffany Stratton as well, where when you just turn someone because the crowd is into them, does that always work, and does that always work well in the babyface run, or do they kind of have nothing to work with as a babyface? I hope that's not the case with Dom. He's got a proximity to Liv and Raquel, and there is nothing face about Liv and Raquel, so that will certainly all have to play out, and we will have to have some sort of split from the Judgment Day by Finn or by Dom. And I would think with all the negativity towards the Judgment Day that Finn has had, he'd be the odd man out of the group, although I'd be more than okay with this being the end of the Judgment Day. The Judgment Day has been so stale for so many months. I would be more than okay for it being time to just stick a bullet in it, be done with it. On the question earlier about where does Braun Breaker go, he says Braun's going to beat Jay if Gunther doesn't get a rematch. If McMahon was still running things, I think he'd lose his mind seeing Jacob getting cheers over. That would confuse him. That would confuse him very much. What's up? What's up, Donnie? Bad Raw after Mania. Well, this is the show after Mania. I won't be on for a Raw after Mania tonight. I'll just give you guys the heads up there. Probably going to transition away from the Raw after Manias, but you'll still see me on a weekly basis. Which is not necessarily as much on the post shows. But we'll all live. Speaking of living, Randy Orton's match was out next. Randy Orton and the TBD. Now, I didn't put this out anywhere, so there's no way to believe me, but my pick coming into this was maybe a Sami Zayn return or Nick Aldis. I really thought they were going to do Randy and Nick Aldis the way they had been building this. I thought it was going to be the scenario where no one wants to face Randy, but Nick Aldis ends up, taking off his jacket and they have a little bit of a match. One little moment for Nick Aldis. The other one that people were talking about was a Rusev Miro appearance. Now, they were in a really difficult position, and I'm not the only one to point this out. Having an open challenge with a guy like Orton, who you know is pretty much guaranteed to be in the main event of the next pay-per-view, put them in a really awkward spot where you want to have a hot entrance by whoever it's going to be to come out in that open challenge. But Randy's got to get the victory here. You couldn't have Randy losing this open challenge after he himself being gone for a long time and being locked in this blood feud with Kevin Owens, the match that was unfortunately canceled. So he comes out there, Orton does, and he's in the blue trunks with the yellow writing on it, just like he's a rookie, like he's about to do a bunch of drop kicks and hurt himself and get himself into a lot of trouble otherwise. But we're there. The show is starting. We're contemplating who it's going to be. The little doors open, and there it was. It was Joe Hendry, TNA champion Joe Hendry. WrestleMania was believing in Joe Hendry. You had the full treatment, the song, everything. It wasn't Jimmy Uso. It was Joe Hendry. What the hell world are we living in where the TNA champion is facing Randy Orton on WrestleMania? All of that is odd. I gotta say though, say what you want about Joe Hendry. Some people think he's more of a joke. Some people think he's a future main eventer. Some people think he's a guy who's just been around for a while that's getting his shine because whatever, people think it's his turn. There's a lot of opinions on Joe Hendry. The one thing I don't think you can discount though was that Joe Hendry was kind of a perfect person to be in this position on this night, because Joe Henry's a person that you can beat fairly easy with Randy Orton without killing the character. He's the TNA champion. And in the hierarchy of the way WWE television works, it's LFG, Evolve, TNA, NXT. Those are like the levels of development. So in like main roster logic, this is basically like a high school quarterback or a high school basketball player trying to play for the Golden State Warriors. Maybe very talented, maybe going to be something in the future, but this is the talent disparity is what it is. So immediately I thought that was a good choice. Michael thought it might be Malachi Black. I didn't think it would be Malachi Black because they did announce his date on SmackDown that he'd be here on, was it 4/25, right? They announced that, or put the graphic up last Friday. So I thought that kind of eliminated him. I think Miro was a high possibility, except for, again, would you really want to beat Miro or have Miro beat Orton in this position? I don't think you can do that. Part of the problem with this sort of open challenge booking, people aren't in the right positions to take losses at the right time. So Mike asked if Randy Orton was going for the TNA Impact World Championship. That would be a great storyline if he was just angry or whatever. He had this obsession with TNA, say like, because Joe Hendry was stiff with him in the match or something like that, and he just went down there with a quest to win that championship, and that would be amazing. And we get him like on a pay-per-view or something. Never going to happen. But I think that would be a fun little piece of business just to keep like a main event Randy Orton distracted for a little bit. I think that's pretty awesome. Joe Hendry, though, I gotta say, looked minuscule next to Randy Orton. Now, Randy Orton's a big dude. He's obviously very cut. Hasn't been in the ring for a while, so he's like extra bulky right now. But good God, Joe Hendry looked tiny next to him. Remember the phrase I used to use back in the day, indie tall? I think that applies to Joe Hendry. Because I don't perceive Joe Hendry as tiny. Do you guys? But boy, he looked small next to Orton. He was able, though, to get in a little bit of offense before Orton hit him with a real RKO out of nowhere. The way they ran the camera angle, it really was that type of RKO out of nowhere. But Joe Hendry ends up getting his follow-away slam out of it, and then there's just another RKO out of nowhere, and he gets the pin. After the match, big ovation for the pin. You got Orton out there. He's helping Henry to his feet, giving him his respect, giving him his flowers. The crowd's cheering, but you knew where this was going to happen. Boom! Hit the third RKO on poor Joe Hendry. So that's what we think of the TNA champ here on WrestleMania. You're worth 3 RKOs. And of course, all of this is big pop. And as Michael mentioned, Orton ended up doing the Joe Hendry pose at the end. So not much of any storyline progression here. There, as I mentioned at the start of this, there was only so much you can do. And so I think anyone would have been disappointing. One of the analogies people have made was like Taz. And it's 2000, right? Where Taz comes in as the ECW champion and loses on SmackDown to Triple H. That's a little bit different because it's what's up, Maddie? Happy holidays. I maybe the Taz thing felt worse at the time because it felt like ECW was more presented as a world champion, but it's basically the same concept. Although it feels like maybe the TNA partnership is more in line transparently with what the ECW partnership was back in the day. So in some ways, it feels like everything's under one umbrella. I guess with you know what, Maddie? I guess with Orton, it just comes down to keeping him strong headed into St. Louis for a match with Cena. Now, these two have never really had any meaningful chemistry despite having a bazillion matches with each other. They've also never had this dynamic that they're going to have going into this match. So it should be a heck of amount of heat and pretty entertaining. And you're going to keep, like, you never have to question if they're going to keep Orton strong. Orton is kept strong. Not something you got to worry about. Yeah, E, and really, though, here's the thing. E put it perfect. He said, Hendry versus Orton was just a fun, full match for some entertainment. It was. And I think it was harmless, but I also think it kind of killed the show tonight. It reminded me a little bit, again, I go back to like WrestleMania 34, where people were really excited to see Daniel Bryan's return, but a little bit of the match having some selling in it and that kind of stuff kind of killed the momentum of that night, and people were kind of unhappy for the rest of that night with everything else that they saw. And that was the turning point. I don't think people were unhappy with this. I think people were pretty hyped by this, but this match and this segment took the focus down just a little bit after those 3 matches that were just absolute bangers that you had this regular segment. And I think it kind of normalized the night a little bit and had just a little bit of somberness to it. I don't think it would be Cody, Matt, but are you sure it was Sarah or maybe it was Tegan? But that was the Orton segment. Again, not a lot to necessarily be taken away from it because it is what it is. Speaking of is what it is, up next was a match that I'm not sure had expectations or not. AJ Styles and Logan Paul had virtually no build to it. It was just the most basic thing you could do with a Logan Paul kind of build. You go out there and you're not respecting the business, and you're AJ Styles, so you're almost 50 years old, and you're like, I'm the old school guy. I will protect the business. I will put you in line, young man. And there you go. So there wasn't a lot of inspiration to that. With that said, I would say myself, I felt a fair amount of hype to this based honestly on the people that were involved. Logan Paul has a history of delivering in these big matches at these big events. And AJ Styles is one of the best wrestlers of all time and consistently still carries people to really good matches. The whole thing about having a great match with a broomstick, I think AJ Styles has been out to prove that thesis for many, many years. Don't know that they quite hit those expectations here, though. The entrances were nothing special, specifically from Logan Paul. You got a little bit of the multi-camera shot, the weird camera angle that he had, and with the drone stuff. And early on in this match, we got a portion of this match in drone vision. It was from the perspective of that drone, which added to the audio being a little off. So you could see like Michael Cole on commentary, he's being very expressive and doing all this stuff. So you could tell like the words that he's saying, they're not matching up with what he's spitting out there. And then you had like a big slam, and you heard the sound from it in a much, much more delayed fashion. So that was a little bit odd, but that was like the one cool spot, I guess, of the match or whatever. There was a run-in a little bit later, but normally these matches are stuck with a million run-ins and prime and ISO speed and all of that kind of stuff and tons of selfies. There was just a little bit less of that. I did love, though, Michael Cole just cut it off Pat McAfee when he just started to promote a show on Max, which is a little iffy because of the AEW, the Warner Brothers stuff, but just in general, I think that, hey, we're on WrestleMania. Why are you promoting this other show, this other streaming network that's not one of the two streaming channels that this is showed on? Oh, Pat McAfee didn't have a terrible night, but he had a bit of a rough one, as he is known to do. This match was odd, though, and Michael kind of sums it up well here. Michael says AJ Styles versus Logan Paul was okay. That drone was not helping. It wasn't, and okay is a good way to put it for a couple of reasons. As I mentioned, Logan Paul has this reputation for being really good in these really big matches, whether it's Seth Rollins or Kevin Owens or Roman Reigns. It seems like he's able to really, really deliver in these big spots and put in these entertaining style matches on the big stages. And there's been some comparisons with him and Shane McMahon, but he's actually a lot more technical, I think, than Shane McMahon, can have a better match. And as this match was going on, I was thinking like, hey, this match is pretty good. It is fairly solid, but it was unspectacular. And I don't know what that says about Logan Paul, because it seemed like to me he was able to have just a normal-ish match with AJ Styles. And again, I don't know if that's a compliment or an insult. I don't know that it's a place he necessarily could have got to a couple of months ago, or a couple of years ago, I should say, when he was just getting started. He has been at this for a while, so him being able to just sort of look like a normal wrestler for someone that's as talented as he is athletically and everything else, that's not a shock to me that he's able to do it. But I was also wondering if some of the luster has kind of worn off, or they're trying to do a little bit different style with him, or did AJ just kind of not have it on this night? And AJ is still so good that he can, again, carry anyone, including a YouTuber, to a really good match. But this was just a normal good match that AJ could have had with anyone else on the roster. There was actually nothing spectacular going on in this match. I did think it was kind of cool when Paul hit a Styles Clash, which the still into finishers, except for last night, which had the coolest version because the still into finishers actually worked out for Jey Uso. It's such an overdone spot that I don't need to see it a lot in matches, but I thought this was a pretty cool version of that. And then we started getting to the interference spots. Logan's friend was hiding with the brass knuckles, but he got caught by Karrion Kross. Karrion Kross, man of integrity here, sticking up for what he said he would do the whole time, that he absolutely needed the AJ to win, for all wrestlers. Kross goes to give AJ the brass knucks, but AJ does not accept. He has too much integrity. All these moral conflicts that people have been involved with over WrestleMania the last couple of nights. I think if people would just take the weapons that they're being offered, they would end up in a much better position. Think about that. Look at all the times this weekend in these two nights where wrestlers were given chances to take out their opponents with weapons, and they had moral conundrums. It never worked out for the people with the moral conundrums. Never, ever, ever. So the lesson should be, if someone offers you a weapon to take advantage of someone, you need to take advantage of yourself, or else you will be taken advantage of. That was the lesson. That was the takeaway from WrestleMania. I spilled coffee on myself for saying that. How about coffee on a Sunday night at midnight Eastern? Swig of coffee for the working man. We'll talk about him later. So AJ doesn't accept, but back in the ring, because you have, and this was a trope a lot on this WrestleMania card as well. The distracted referee distract the babyface so the heel has their full regenerative powers. That happened like 72 times on the card this weekend. And that happened back in the ring. Paul hit one of his pulverizer moves, and that was that. 1, 2, 3. Pretty good, but not really a spectacle. And I have no idea where these people go from here. Obviously, Logan Paul would just get stuck in another feud a few months out. And I would assume it's Karrion Kross and AJ Styles. But we talked about, and I know Karrion Kross has been featured a bit on the show, and he's been a part of the storyline, and he's just interrupting promos all the time, and that's what he does. And he seems to have earned a little bit of goodwill off of that. In the same way I said Drew and Damian was such a step down for Drew, let's be honest, I think it'll be a bit of a step down for Karrion Kross. I really, really hope I am proven wrong on that. He's a talented guy, and he was talented before he came into WWE. And there's definitely more they could be doing with him than having this interrupter guy gimmick. But a feud with AJ Styles, I don't know, is the best direction to go into. And now AJ Styles, we have to wonder what his future holds. He is getting up there. How much longer does he have in wrestling? Maybe a year or two. He's made some comments to that in the past about how close he could be to the end. And tonight he still looks serviceable, or better than serviceable. He still looked very good, but are his big days behind him? Are his days of having these automatic 4-star matches, are those a thing of the past? Or was tonight just a night where he was working with a lesser opponent and carried him to a pretty good match? Again, I don't want to say this was a bad match because I don't think it was, but it was a little underwhelming. I think you expect maybe a big spot out of this or something with a little more emphasis, and then to just have that and that finish kind of flat. I'll be honest, kind of flat. And added to this vibe that was kind of building from this last match, as this WrestleMania card on night 2, which had this super momentum from the earlier matches, was starting to slow down a bit. It's like it's like a buffet, right? They were in Vegas. I was in Vegas a couple weeks ago. You'd have these buffets go. You're so happy. You're seeing the sushi. You're seeing the prime rib, and they're just going to keep cutting it for you every time you go up there. It's amazing. You can get salads like in the interim. There's little pastries on these little things that you can get in between all of your seafood. It's amazing. And then you go like a few weeks later, or excuse me, a few minutes later, a few minutes later, and you still want to eat, but you're really, really full, and it's really, really slow, and everything kind of slows down. And you have that ambition. You still want it to be great, but now you've exhaled and you've taken a little bit of a break, and you're filling up, and you're just becoming more and more bloated. That's what happened on this card. After that great sugar high you had initially, when stuff started slowing down, we all started slowing down. The general energy and vibe of the show started slowing down. Yeah, metabolism. What a bummer. I used to have really good metabolism. Remember those days? Shirts were half the size back then. Energy was much better too. I don't know. This sounds like the start of one of those like TRT commercials or male enhancement commercial. Man, you're just not feeling as good as you used to. Well, can I interest you? Coffee. Coffee. That's what you need. You think this is about coffee? So WrestleMania this year was metabolism. I'm going to take that from you, Mike. Well, we knew we had something in store, though, for what became the co-main event of the evening. And there's no liquor in the coffee. I just didn't want to have a low energy show. I wanted to have my normal Rob Nocturnal knockout self. And I also don't have work tomorrow morning, so hitting the caffeine late at night. So you knew something big was going to happen in the co-main event in the women's tag match because A, it was all of a sudden slotted to much later in the card, and B, the development we get yesterday that Bailey was uh out of the match for non-injury reasons. Injury in storyline, but this was something that was planned according to, I believe it was PW Insider said that this was an angle that was planned, and Sean Ross Sapp might have backed that up. That had been planned weeks in advance. Bailey was never going to team with Lyra. In fact, then they only built it a couple weeks ago. It's not like this big WrestleMania match that they uh, advertised for weeks and weeks and didn't deliver. But you knew it was going to be a big return. You had an idea with, speaking of Irish E, with the Irish of Lyra Valkyria, that there may be a fellow Irish woman that was coming to assist her. And that was the case. It was Becky. The man was back. We have not seen Becky in almost a year since Liv Morgan, as she was saying, effectively retired her, and she was back to team with Lyra. I don't have a lot of analysis on the match. I'll be honest, I kind of tuned out of the match. I was up and I was doing some other stuff, so I can't tell you if it was a good match or a bad match. I can just tell you that Becky got a huge pop, got a manhandle slam, and her and Lyra got the victory. Now, in terms of like tag team logic, this doesn't actually make a whole lot of sense. Tag teams are supposed to be, obviously much better than any single, and especially more than two women that had just teamed up in the last 30 seconds. But I guess the story here that Becky's so good that she ended up getting the pin and she needed all the revenge on Liv that she can get. E asked, does Bayley interfere on Tuesday when Gigi Dolan and Tatum Paxley have their title match for the women's title and cost Lyra the titles to start the feud? I don't think so. I think there's a little bit longer play. I do think this ends up with some kind of long-term storyline with Bayley, whether she goes heel or just the bitter veteran, that remains to be seen. But I do think this eventually leads to that. But the big news is, after a week of speculation about what her future would be, at least for one night, Becky Lynch is back, and Becky Lynch is a champion within WWE. Mike says he scratches it out. He said, kill the women's tag titles or move them to NXT. Women's tag titles can never gain any traction. They had a little bit of a good run, though, with Liv and Raquel. I thought Liv and Raquel really worked as champions. They're really good in those roles of the annoying heels. So I thought that was fine. We'll see where these two go from here, but I don't project it to necessarily be long term. But we need some movement all around. We need Lyra Intercontinental title reign, which has seemingly picked up a little bit in the last couple weeks. We need it to be more. How long is Becky going to be around? What's her role going to be? And more importantly, how aligned is she going to be with Seth Rollins on television? They seem to go back and forth on whether or not they're actually an item in a couple on television. And so I wonder if they're going to acknowledge that now that Seth Rollins was essentially this side of John Cena, the biggest heel in the company now after last night, or at least that's how he was being framed. Good weekend for the family, though, right? Like, they both had successful WrestleMania showings. That's like much better than a lot of the Samoan families did this weekend. A lot of Anoa'i sects did not do nowhere near as good, even if some won some big gold this weekend. Becky being back, though, obviously is huge. When we talk about lack of depth in the women's division, I don't know if the Becky solves a lot of that because she's had a lot of big feuds with a lot of these women, a lot of big matches with at least like the top tier right now. But there is that intercontinental level, that mid tier that it remains to be seen. Does Becky end up kind of fighting down at their level and end up being a little bit reduced in this veteran role that she's going to be in now? Or does she bring him up and does she raise the level of that division? I don't know. It's hard to figure out where she fits in because kind of like Rhea, there's times when she feels like such a bigger star compared to everyone else in the women's division. But it's not the same women's division that she left behind. It's not the Four Horsemen's women's division. There are other elements in play now. She has a very outsized personality, and sometimes I think that could smother others within the division. But you'd rather have her than not, that's for sure. Next up was you, you got through this match, right? And you looked at it was still fairly earlier in the night, and you looked at the remainder of the card and you realized, wait, there's only one match left. There's only the big main event. So you're ready for that. You're doing your calibration. You're taking your final restroom break of the night, doing everything you got to do to get it together for the main event. And then, just like old times, the glass shatters. Austin's music is playing it. All is right in the world for just a little while. Austin comes out there on a four-wheeler. Now, we saw Austin last night at the Hall of Fame, and we knew he was in town working with the WWE World, whatever they call it nowadays, the NXT, the Access, whatever. You know what I'm talking about. So you knew he was obviously around, and maybe there's some rumors about could he get involved in the main event. I don't know. Well, when you seen him coming out before the main event even started, that was pretty much a dead giveaway that he would have no involvement later on the show. But it didn't matter because it's WrestleMania, the glass is breaking, it's Austin, and he's out there on a four-wheeler, which is like really good news to 99% of the wrestling world, except for that one woman that was sitting in the front row. Because my guy Austin, he comes out there probably having a few Steve Weisers, which back in the day, those were actual Budweisers, sometimes light beer, but it was like generic American beer. Nowadays, they're like Stone Cold IPAs and all this stuff, like some real lethal crap he's got there in these cans. And he's out there on the four-wheeler. He does the thing. He takes the turns. And he's talked about it back in the day that those turns would be brutal. But I guess time comes for us all. Now, to my knowledge, Steve Austin is actually like a professional off-road race car driver in his spare time. But when he goes back to his old job, he doesn't quite have his driving skills. And he hit the barricade and he knocked the woman down. Just knocked her back. And you had all the commotion, all this was going on. When they got up, that woman, she had a look on her face like she was furious. She was mad. She's probably in a little bit of pain. I don't know what it was, but there was a look on her face that was something else. It was something. Fast forward to the end of the Austin segment. Austin looked like he was going to go check on the situation a little bit. And at that point, it was Nick Khan dealing with the situation. So Austin, a guy who was, once had to deal with attempted vehicular homicide in the parking lot of his workplace, has now hit someone with the four-wheeler. And let's see, how many celebrities do you think that woman has met tonight to try to keep her from suing? I don't know. She walking around with the Vince neck brace, though, whenever we see her next. Important. Nick Khan was over there. He was smoothing things over. He might have offered Tony Khan in return. Billionaire son now. Now, I said Austin was out there. What was he out there to do? Well, he was out there to announce the attendance. It wasn't very funny. He was counting the amount of people and wetting them. Austin didn't quite have all his steam that he had, like on the was it 2019 or whenever they or what about 5 years ago, they had him make an appearance on Raw and just electrified the whole arena. People were happy to see him, but he didn't quite have that command here. He was there to announce the attendance. If you notice, every time Austin's there to do something that isn't that important, his heart clearly isn't in it, and it kind of comes out to what it comes out to. So he announced the attendance, the combined attendance. That was the bottom line. Had some more beers, checked on his victim, went back up. I don't know, maybe got a DUI. I don't know what happened there. The Austin segment was a bit of a waste of time, although it gave us a heck of a highlight. Yeah, the number's weird too when they're more reasonable with the 60,000, which I think that's obviously more reasonable for a football stadium. But then you get the combined record, which is just it's two different nights. I mean, it is what it is. We didn't get as much brags about the gate records, which is all of our favorite things for them to brag about, right? How much money everyone else pays for the ticket. It was bad tonight, and it was bad the night before. There's so many cutaways, so many sponsorships right now. It's like the company traded pretty good booking with Triple H in for this extremely monetized version of the company. And the sponsorships are one thing, but the constant cuts to the celebrities. I liked it as like that UFC feel they had on the first Netflix, but it's really wearing out its welcome, and it's becoming this filler in between matches that driving me nuts. It makes for dumb banter between the announcers. I just not into it. Just not into it at this point. What I was hoping to be into was the main event, because that was what's on next between Cody Rhodes and John Cena. Now, I don't know about you guys. Maybe you rich people who have the rich guys version of Peacock might have saw a video package, but there was no real video package. No real build to this being the main event segment other than Austin and his little vehicle accident. And in terms of entrances, there was a slight change to John Cena, but not much. That had been one of the stories coming into it. And Cena had said there would be no change. You don't deserve a change. But I think there was maybe some thought that maybe at WrestleMania we'd get a bit of presentation change, but not yet. The only thing we really got is we had no real Titantron video out of John Cena. It simply just said John Cena, but it was the dark presentation with the dark shirt that he has with the towel over his head. A little bit of let's go Cena, Cena sucks, but mostly booze and ambient noise when he came out there. A bit of an Evil Knievel entrance right before he came out there. So not a very elaborate entrance. One of the more subdued. Didn't have anyone singing him out. Austin probably loved. Actually, Evil Knievel was Cody. But Austin loved that. Shake that. It was the generic entrance. He came out there, got the booze. Evil Knievel was Cody. They have the Evil Knievel colors. You're in Vegas. You have the thing jumping. And Cody came out with his mask that was like retractable. No Brandy out there. She was there ringside. But fairly nondescript for a Cody entrance. Cody, though, despite what we were talking about with the reaction, you couldn't really tell if he was getting cheered or booed because people were just going to sing his song. So that wasn't going to be the time and place to really figure that out. Eventually, you got to the boos for Cody. Now, I got to say, for everything that I'm going to say about what happened in this match after the fact or how this match went, the start of this thing definitely had a big fight feel to it. It was almost like a dollar store Rock and Hogan, where the crowd was really into it. They were booing both guys. They were cheering both guys. They were just very sucked in to be a part of it. And even me on my couch, I was sitting here just, right over there, sitting there thinking, oh, wow, this has like this is big moment energy to it. Because I got to say, despite this overall, especially earlier in the night, being a pretty quality night of wrestling, there hasn't been a WrestleMania feel to almost anything this weekend. I think when the triple threat last night was said and done, you had that kind of WrestleMania seal of approval, but it was on the lower end of that. And when you had the start of this match, this is the first time I really felt like we had that big fight feel maybe all weekend. And the match starts out and it's a lot of Cena backing out and slowing things down. And it was surreal to see Cena explicitly working as a heel. I mean, he worked as a heel, I think you can say, in One Night Stand 2006. And I think with maybe the first match with The Rock, you could say he did sort of work as the heel in that match, but he's still a babyface character. And he still has to do like babyface things. This was explicitly heel Cena. So it was interesting to just see that it was a different dynamic that obviously we had never seen in a main event context. Early on, it was Cody getting the best of the exchanges, but eventually Cena did get an offensive spot. He got the stomping spot, and when he got that, there was a little bit of brutality to it, and that was an awesome moment early on in the match. The way the crowd really started booing and getting into it. Again, it felt like you were the witness of something special, something big. I got to say, though, I gave Cena a little bit of props early on. He didn't look as old early on in terms of his performance as he had looked at the last few years whenever he had been competing. He wasn't so slow and plotting. He was slow and plotting as a character, but he was in control and he had a little bit of snap to him. And I think he had a nice command to him as like the heel that leads the match. He was in control, but not super, super slow. I think the first real big move, though, that almost like garnered a near fall was Cena hitting the tornado DDT, and that's the point where I think the match was picking up into a little bit of a get serious moment, and it was very, very soon. Very, very soon. It seemed like there wasn't a lot of filling out. And we're used to some of these matches, especially these WWE main events, they can go pretty long. And some of these Cody matches have these big, long buildups to it and these anticipations. This did not have it. After the Tornado DDT, though, and the kickout, though, we started going into a 5 moves of doom uh, section, and it was a very, very slow, very deliberate 5 moves of doom. So you got a little bit again of this different character and this different presentation. The 5 moves of doom being so loaded and such this explicit agreement that Cena has with the audience, and it's playing out in this very, very slow, very deliberate fashion. But he's unable to get the 5 knuckle shuffle off. You get the eye poke, the Dustin Dusty sort of way of doing the eye poke that Cody gets before the 5 knuckle shuffle. At that point, Cody was able to fire up. He hit the disaster kick. He got a Cody cutter, only to get a 2 count. Cena then hits himself an AA, and he only gets a 2 count. This time, though, he goes to hit the 5 knuckle shuffle, and it's rolled up into another 2 count. You see the pattern here. Started to remind me a little bit of WrestleMania 29, that they went into the finishing sequences really quick, and it made you think, oh, shoot, do they not have a lot in the tank in terms of either stamina or actually creativity? Because if you recall that match of WrestleMania 29, they just ended up spamming finishers at the end. And it wasn't a very entertaining match, even though those individual little spots might get pops. At that point, you have a bit of an Irish whip, and Cody does like the Ric Flair turnbuckle move, and he does it like almost perfect the way he lands on his feet. He does it actually with more grace than Ric Flair used to do it with, so it doesn't look as cool. But that's where we get the middle rope AA, but you got to kick out at 2 again. The kick outs at 2, kick outs at 2, kick outs at 2. Cena goes for his top rope leg drop, but Cody reverses into a power bomb and once again gets a 2 count. This didn't quite have the momentum on it. It works a little bit better when someone with a little more grace is flying. It was an odd move, but we're definitely into the big spot section of the match. Cody gets a 2 count with the Cody cutter. The Crossroads is reversed into an AA, which eventually transitions into an STF or STFU spot, which was going on for a little bit. Eventually, Cody's breaking of the submission is what led to the ref bump. And I mean, if any match you had a ref bump and you're just looking, you're like that looking at the ramp. Where's the Rock? Where's the Rock? Where's the Rock? Now, going into this, I thought the ref bump section, and we still may see that, was going to be a chance for Cena to tap without losing this match. Did he really call it the STFU? I was saying STFU just to have some fun with it, Mike. I didn't realize he was actually saying that. Maybe that's why I was saying it. But yeah, you got that ref bump. You're looking at the crowd because you assume that the Rock is going to come out, and I assume Cody was going to tap in this situation, but he did not. He did get the visual pin off of a Crossroads, but there was no one there. Cena goes and he exposes the turnbuckle, and Cody's head eventually hits said turnbuckle. And hits an AA. Cody kicks out of the ref. Cody kicks out. The ref is barely revived. It's a slow, dramatic count, and all of a sudden, Fiend by Travis Scott is in the air. Now, I didn't know a rapper could get an entrance in the middle of a match full with music and everything, and everyone gets stopped in frozen molasses the way they do, like when Brock Lesnar enters a Money in the Bank. Didn't know that was possible, but apparently it's something that can be done. So Travis Scott's walking out with that title he carries around, the whole Cactus Jack thing. All the references by McAfee that I don't know what the hell he's talking about. There was a ref buff in between? How did that go, Mike? I don't have that in my notes. There had to have been one. Cena, though, he's sitting there. He's so happy to see Travis Scott. Travis Scott takes a real long, slow, plodding march to the ring. You figure this was going to be leading to more, because why is Travis Scott there? Not just because, like, hey, rappers show up on our wrestling, but he was involved in this angle from the beginning, when they used to care about this angle at the beginning, when this angle was part of this big, sprawling storyline that Travis Scott and The Rock and the powers that be, the corporate structure, was beating up Cody. Tonight, though, I guess The Rock must have lost all his money at the tables and couldn't quite get his nice shirt on to work tonight or something. I don't know. It was just Travis Scott, and he's coming out there. Okay, it was during the Irish. I just remember the one of the submission spot. So good call there. So Scott's in the ring. He doesn't get to slap Cody. Instead, he eats a crossroads, gets his ultimate receipt, as Wade Barrett was saying. But he ends up pulling the ref out after another spot and after another after he pulled out the ref. They ended up being face to face. As I said, he eats the crossroads. Got a little stumble there. Hopefully you watched and not relying on my complete recap to know what's going on there. Mike's helping me there. So Travis Scott eats the crossroads. He's dead. Cena's stalking, though, with the title the whole time. He goes to hit him with the title, and then they're playing tug of war with the title. Now, tug of war with the title has a rich history in WWE. Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns once had a go-home show that was built around them tug of warring on the title. So this is a tradition within WWE. Don't say anything about that. And it's got the title. Cody's got the title. He's going to take out Cena. But he didn't listen to his Bray Wyatt tapes. He doesn't embrace the hate. And like I said, this weekend, that was the theme. You needed to embrace the hate this weekend if that was in you, because it wasn't going to work out good for you if you did not. He ends up having the crisis of conscience. It takes a low blow from Cena. Oh, dreaded low blows are deciding things all over WrestleMania weekend. Cena lands the belt shot to the head. I thought there might be more here, but there was not. 1, 2, 3. Just like that, the story is over. Cody's 1-year title reign is done. And John Cena has his record 17th WWE championship. This time as a heel. And that was WrestleMania night 2. That was the main event. What do you guys think of that main event? I don't think the match itself was a complete train wreck. I thought it was okay. I thought the slow, deliberate Cena heel stuff towards the beginning worked really well and could tell a really interesting story. Right until they went into the finishing sequence, which came very, very early. And everything felt a little rushed, because the biggest criticism that everyone's been having is it was an underbooked finish. And that's odd, because we complain sometimes about the overwrought, overbooked finishes that Triple H books. And with the Bloodline storyline, they really, really worked out. But you wonder if they're going to do that every week, if that's what makes a match disappointing or not. But in this case, I can't even say the storyline was built around it, but there was the big implication that there was more to this storyline. And the only help, again, the only heel help that John Cena received, well, he was acting very heelish himself during the entirety of the match. You're not going to say he wasn't a heel during the match. He got the help of a rapper. And that was it. That's all he ended up needing. But that's all he ended up getting. So it ended up feeling very underwhelming. You go to the finishing sequence, all of that was fairly underwhelming. You kept on hoping for a little bit more. You expected a little bit more. And you end up just getting this anticlimactic pin and a little bit of a reaction for the 17th time champion. And then I just felt like it was kind of a flat ending. I'd be curious for those who were in the building to exactly what the reaction was to that win, but it was a flat ending. There's no other way to put it. Again, have no problem with them putting the title on Cena if that's what they were going to do here. I think you can get much more out of that heel run. he had to win. He had to win. He had to have this, to have the title, to go forward, to lord that over, to have something really meaningful, and to have someone take it off him, and to have that be really, really meaningful in the limited amount of time that we have Cena left. With that said, it was just such a lame finish, so underwhelming. Whether right or wrong, WWE has set a little bit of a precedent with their main events and the spectacularness of them, especially on these major shows. And to have this be just conventional interference and low blows to get the win, I think honestly, everything we saw thrown at Cody last year, everything we've seen thrown at Cody in some of the Brock Lesnar matches he had, in any of these matches that we've seen him in over the years, for what happened tonight to be the thing that gets him the pin is a little lame. Now, I'll always reserve the judgment, and we do these shows the night of, so we have instant reactions. We have hot takes. Many of the takes we have don't age well. There's information that's going to come in later that's going to give us different perspective. We're going to see the follow-ups. Oh, I get what they were getting at. But we only have to go off of what we have tonight. And what we have tonight was straight up underwhelming. But it's not just because it was tonight. I've been saying this for weeks. The build to this match was terrible. The entirety of the John Cena heel term has been underwhelming. It's had its moments. It's had a promo here and there that's caught our attention. But the entirety of how this build was put together has just been so lame, and it's because of the start of it. Let's face it. The original sin of this happened with the whole Cody selling your soul storyline. Now, we knew going in, or at least it was reported going in, The Rock might not be able to be a part of this year's WrestleMania. But then we had the flat build getting going in earnest many, many months ago. And The Rock came in to save the day, asking Cody to sell his soul. And instead, it was John Cena that sold his soul. Now, I wouldn't say that they have completely, entirely, 100% dismissed that storyline. After all, you did have Travis Scott coming in tonight, and that was a reference to what happened. And there was like 2 mentions of The Rock coming in. But they clearly knew they weren't getting The Rock, even though The Rock was minimally a part of this build. And it's not like they advertised The Rock, but you felt like the implication was that there was going to be something more. Again, I can't fault them for not giving us something they didn't advertise. They didn't say The Rock was going to be involved, or they didn't say there would be this bigger storyline. But Travis Scott just ain't enough. Let's face it. That was not enough for the epicness of this title reign that Cody had, for the epicness of John Cena turning heel, and for what was supposed to be the epicness of this supposedly legendary WrestleMania. Which, let's be face it, is going to go down as a fairly forgotten WrestleMania with a fairly forgotten build. What was the better show? NXT Mania 1 or Mania 2? Between Mania 2 and NXT, not Night 1. NXT was really good. I enjoyed the NXT show most of all three. I watched them in pretty close proximity. I enjoyed that show the most. I watch a lot less NXT, so I have a little less context to that than I do main roster. But on that point of main roster, I think you needed to deliver something a little more for your WrestleMania main event, for what was being billed as like the biggest match ever. Something a little more shocking. I guess your big shock moment was the chamber moment, and this is just the first page in the chapter. But WrestleMania needs a little more for that. It needs to be a little more. I think fans need to leave a little more angry at John Cena, or there needs to be a little more bigness to it. Maybe if you bring in The Rock, it ends up being cool or whatever, but I don't think so. No. And again, I'm pointing to The Rock because The Rock inserted himself in this storyline. That's why I'm pointing to The Rock. And I made a video about this up on Brass Ring months ago, and every time we have these Rock incursions, it could shake up the storyline, but honestly, it probably shows a sign of weakness, and that you have to bring this guy in to shake up the storylines. But there's no point in bringing him in to shake up the storylines if there's not even any follow through. If it goes together with anything to add to 2 months plus 60 days. That was from the Rumble or from the Chamber? Or that was the length of the entrances. Either way, it was a really long time. And I think after this weekend of what was quite frankly an underwhelming Mania, the people wanted something more. Lord knows they paid top dollar for those tickets. And I still saw reports tonight that there were plenty of empty seats, and and that such. And maybe, the blue might be just a little bit off the roads in WWE. There's times in current WWE when I'm sitting there and it feels like a lot of things are about to fall apart, but their business is so strong where I'm wondering, is this like wrestling WWE in the year 2000 when they were riding really, really high? But you go back, read those old observers and torches. Now, there was no way to know it back then because we can do this with the benefit of hindsight, but the signs of decline were all around. I don't know if WWE is overextended. I don't know if WWE had one great storyline in them and they're having trouble finding their footing since then. But the year since last year's WrestleMania, if that's any indication of what's going on, I think we might have already been at the peak and we're in this good but not great era anymore. And we had a really underwhelming WrestleMania weekend. You put these two shows together, and this was not one of the great weekends or one of the great major events of the Paul Levesque era. It was, if nothing else, just indulgent. Unfortunately, I had 714. I had either 50% or less than 50%. Um, and it just makes me wonder, like, I don't even know that we knew we were in such a peak that we were in the last year. And sometimes when you get out of those peaks, it takes a while for you to realize that you're not there anymore. And what's up, Tornado? I think you can. It's not lost. It's not like WWE's going out of business tomorrow because they had a lame WrestleMania weekend. But WWE's at a point that they're asking a lot of their fans in a lot of ways. They're charging ridiculous prices to these shows. They're offering all these other experiences that offer all these other enhancements. You need 2 streaming services and a cable subscription to follow their programming. WWE is asking a lot of their fans right now. And in recent years, to their credit, WWE has been delivering on the screen. They're still at that point where they're asking all this from their fans, but they've had an entire year now. 2025 has just been a year since the Rumble that's been on the skids. And so my broader question maybe is, how long can this last? How long can this sustain? How long do they get out of this funk, which in my opinion probably started at last year's WrestleMania? They culminated a really good storyline and never had a real follow-up to that. And this year's WrestleMania very much reflected a bit of a hangover from last year's WrestleMania, which is wild because in some ways there was less turmoil in the company. Remember all the turmoil leading into that? A big balloon that's going to pop. Yeah. And again, it happens to every company. There is always going to be a downturn. And it probably won't get as bad as it did in the mid 2000s or the 90s, but again, it's a demanding time. And I think that they need to deliver on what they say they do. They're very good at self-aggrandizing themselves these days, patting themselves on the back, all the great things they do. And it's a little less annoying when it's not Vince and Stephanie doing it, but the point still stands. It's a demanding product right now. So the fans have a right to be demanding of it in return. In terms of the characters here and where they go, again, I don't think this was a bad booking decision in terms of the decision. It was just more of the execution, which fell completely flat. I think both characters are in pretty good spots if they can keep the pieces going from here. Obviously, Cena, it's a much more short-term thing. Title win does ensure that you get the heel run going for a longer. Remember the night of, some people were wondering if this was just simply a heel program to get to WrestleMania, to have the big handshake at the end or something like that. That is not the case. This ended Cody's year-long title reign. So this will obviously have more legs to it. And how long the heel run goes, I don't know. You got to figure there's going to be a babyface redemption arc somewhere towards the end. Although I would love Cena to be so old school that he just stays heel and hated forever, and that's how he rides off into the sunset. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think they'll leave the merchandise money on the table. I don't think they'll leave that pop on the table. But tonight's result does bring up an interesting question. who takes the belt back off of Cena? It's been a while since we've considered the belt being around someone other than Cody Rhodes and Roman Reigns. In fact, it's been about 5 years since one of those two people hasn't had has had the has like it hasn't been expanded. Even in the Roman era when he had all these challengers, did you ever really take any of them seriously other than Cody at WrestleMania 39? Maybe Drew at Clash in the Castle, maybe Sammy for a little bit. But those are the two guys who took the falls the last two nights of WrestleManias. Those are the two guys who dominated the main event scene for the last several years. And now there's someone else in that position, someone else who had dominated it for the last decade. So who gets the belt off him? Is this the ultimate redemption arc for Cody, where he takes this one loss and he has to rebuild and reload, and he's the one that makes everything right? He's the one that saves the company from this reign of terror from John Cena. Or is it a new guy? Is it a young guy? Is it a Gunther? Is it a Braun Breaker? I'm naming these heelish guys for this fellow heel. So I don't think it'll necessarily be one of those guys, but that's a good question because the belt is seemingly on SmackDown, but they don't ever fully neglect Raw. I think SmackDown. I don't know. Netflix seems pretty important. I think it'll be spread across both, but be implied to be on SmackDown. Cena getting this win back, though, would be a heck of a part of his redemption. Or do you use John Cena to get the belt on one of the other baby faces that you wouldn't have had beat Cody? Does a CM Punk, does a Randy Orton get the belt off of Cena, and that sets up to a major match with Cody, or that sets up to a major match with a youngster? Having the belt off of Cody and onto a heel Cena, again, not the worst thing in the world. Just wish they would have executed getting there a little smoother. Cody himself is the much more interesting of the two. He does have the redemption arc. He does also have the character change arc. And there's a few different ways you can go in the character arc. The character change mode. You can go for a full heel turn, which in the wake of a John Cena heel turn, I don't really have the stomach or the need for another major heel turn off of a years long babyface. Or you could have a bit of a character change, a bit of an edge included in the character. I think part of the animus that some people had, myself included, with the build of this match actually falls on Cody a little bit. And not that necessarily Cody did anything wrong, but I think the character was more earnestly getting stale and was somewhat exposed against John Cena, where he had to bring something a little bit different. He was kind of cutting the same promos. He would get the crowd very much into him. So I don't want to say that Cody was completely like mailing it in or phoning it in, but I think this program exposed the need for that character to also evolve beyond the one note he has been doing for a couple of years. This should, from a character perspective, lead him to refigure, recalibrate, and have a bit of a change. He's still basically the AEW American Nightmare Cody, which has been super, super over. So I don't fault him for falling into that character or remaining that character. But we need to see a little bit of evolution with him, a little bit of an edge, a little bit of expansion. There's still many more years of main events that he has left in him, way more than John Cena has left in him. There's still another generation to put over. There's still more time at the top. But Cody Rhodes, in the most recent version of Cody that we had, was not going to be the way to get that done. So regardless of what the result was going to be tonight, there did need to be a bit of a shift in the character. And I think they need to take that seriously. If by November it's still the same basic Cody character and it's getting like a smattering of cheers, or even it's getting pretty universal cheers, I would say by next year's WrestleMania, that character might be dead in the water. It might be much less on the card if they don't make a serious change in the character to get it to reframe a little better. Yeah, Mike, I would kind of echo E's point on there that like the triple threat and this match, they got built over multiple shows. They do tend to do that with the main event stuff. We are about to hit our 2 hour mark, guys. That means I'm almost ready to get out of here because how long can you listen to one person talk for 2 hours? I sure as hell appreciate you guys listening to me talk for 2 hours, though. That's a marathon by you guys. Like some of you guys have been on the entirety of the stream. That is so awesome that you listen to someone talk about wrestling for that long. I don't know what the superstar movement window is like. He's asking about that. That's a really good question. Are they doing a draft this year? Or are they just going to leave the rosters and just have them go wherever they want? There's been so much roster movement. There was a draft. It was a transfer portal we had not that long ago. I would like if they're going to have rosters for them, obviously, to stay a little bit static. That is always going to be where I lean. Um, I would though like to stay away from them having anything explicit like that. They might move a name here or there, and I would take that. Again, I don't think they're that married to, and it's what we're getting at. I don't think we're that married um, to these rosters as they are, or to this brand split as it is. I think there's plenty of movement, and it gets really annoying, and it gets annoying to the fan base. But I think in terms of booking, they're just moving people. Like if someone's on a show, I think belts maybe are a little more stuck to the shows than it does seem to be the individual. Michael made the mention that Fraxium might be called up or someone on Raw. I think there's going to be quite a few call ups, and you had the mention tonight. You know, you had the tops patch that everyone was wearing tonight, and they said tomorrow night anyone who debuts is also going to have a certain kind of tops patch, which implies that there's going to be a few debuts, and that is a way to freshen up the roster. And it doesn't take that much. If there is going to be a roster shakeup, though, you need talent headed over to SmackDown. SmackDown needs the bodies. They need to build out that 3 hour show a lot more so than Raw. So there does need to be some roster rebalancing. To answer the bigger question, I just don't have the stomach for that. Yes, and not forgetting returns. What do you guys think? We get Rusev on Monday and Alistair on Friday, which I think we're getting that for sure. Those would be big, and again, that adds. And again, it's you add a couple of bodies that does shake things up just enough and freshen things up just enough as long as there's a follow through. I have a feeling post WrestleMania season though this year for all the negativity that I've talked on this. I do have a feeling that post WrestleMania season is going to be a little bit more productive than last year's post WrestleMania season because they kind of went into cruise control with Cody's win last year, and everything just got a little mundane. Remember those Raws following WrestleMania last year? They were the doldrums of Raws. Raw didn't really get back on track until Drew and Punk heated up their feud, and then Raw picked up quite a bit of momentum from there. And then SmackDown's been dead ever since it's moved to 3 hours. But I think we're going to get a little bit better focus coming in off of these storylines, off of what was kind of an incomplete WrestleMania. Um, WrestleMania had a lot of consequence to it, but it because there's not the greatest of feelings about it. I could see it being one of those cards that we're going to look at the end of the year and oh yeah, WrestleMania was a thing, but so many stuff has happened and so much has changed. Unlike this past year where for WrestleMania 40, that was like the shining light that's still shown out there, and that big main event and the re-edits of that go up, and it's still an event that seems to be very, very that had this significance. And obviously there was a lot of significant about this card, but how it lives and how it ages remains to be seen. Like that opener was great, and the first half of this card was really good tonight. This was not a legendary WrestleMania. This was not a memorable WrestleMania. It looked cool. You had Cena as a heel, but other than that, I don't know what will be the big takeaway from this WrestleMania. What we're going to remember years from now is, and I was there that night. That happened that night. Yeah, it was the Cena Hill WrestleMania, and even that was fairly underwhelming. Aleister on SmackDown, Rusev and Lana on Raw. E's got Brock returning tomorrow night. That'd be huge. I don't think that's happening. Now, as I mentioned earlier, though, I will not be with you tomorrow night. In fact, I'm going to be taking a little bit of a hiatus from the Raw post show specifically, not the pay per views, just the Raw shows. But don't worry about that. You're still going to hear from me once a week. We're just going to transition the format a little bit and go back to more of a traditional Nocturnal Knockout where we talk about stuff other than the show that just happened. Maybe we'll have a little bit better takes, cooked up just a little bit better, a little more time to think about it. But it's going to be a midweek show, a little bit of a more normal podcast. I hope you've enjoyed the Raw post shows. Been doing them pretty much since the beginning of January with a little bit of inconsistency the last couple of weeks leading into WrestleMania. But for the most part, the entirety of this build on Raw, I've taken you there. But it's time to change and do something different post WrestleMania season. So be looking for regular weekly streams right here on the One True Sport YouTube channel, because unless Zach changes something, ain't nothing about that gonna change anytime soon. But guys, I've been on with you for over 2 hours. I can't possibly speak anymore. I have drank all this coffee, which I'll be up forever now. And my throat is super scratchy. So I'm going to go ahead and see you guys a little bit later in the week. Unfortunately, E is going to be stuck with Coachman. But I've really, really enjoyed talking to you these last couple of nights and breaking down this card. If anything, talking to you was a lot funner than watching these 2 nights of WrestleMania. I'll see you guys later in the week. Take care, guys.